are mainly working today on the drafting of a white paper on climate change and financial risk. But before we get to that, we'll sort of go with our normal order of business. Can you help with the roll call, please?
Chair Kaufman?
Here.
Vice Chair Fletcher?
Here.
Commissioner Algado?
Here.
Commissioner Keener?
Here.
Commissioner Maynard?
Here.
All five commissioners are present in court.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes. I've been told that May 8th minutes, which I know is some time ago, so it jogs your memories, May 8th, they are ready for our review, but October 16th is not. So we're actually going to move the October 16th minutes to a future agenda. But everybody should have a copy of May 8th in front of you. And I have one typo that's been caught that should be changed. Other than that, anybody else have any edits to May 8th minutes? Read quickly.
These numbers associated with our clip. I'm not questioning about this, the error of the record.
Would you want like on page 2 of 6? I think so.
Yeah, I'll kind of look backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
That's quite impressive.
These notes are for the record. I think these for reference later.
I'm gonna get this up, so I'm looking already. I'm sorry, I'm still not a PC person. I don't actually know how to open Flash, but I promise.
Maybe double click it.
Hit this?
Double click it. And I think if you go to the yellow tab folder at the bottom,
This thing?
on the left. And yeah, and it should be the NVPTC. Is that?
They're in the right.
Okay, what's it called, Rosie?
It's called Hazard White Paper _RA. It's the fourth. Oh yeah, there you go.
Great, thank you. Did anybody have any amendments to the minutes? May minutes? I have one on page 5, third bullet point from the bottom. It says higher resilience on natural disaster, natural resources for subsistence. It should be higher reliance.
McPherson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Anything else? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Motion to approve. Second? Anybody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approved minutes of May 8th, and we'll review October 16th later, the later meeting. Director Stamber, can I call you for a report of the office?
Good afternoon, Chair Huffman, members of the Climate Change Commission. I want to start real quick. I'm really pleased to have Peter Jenkins from 100 Resilient Cities here this week. He's working on a project, and I'd like to see if I can introduce him and call him up for just 1 second to sort of give him a, we don't get him out here very often. So if you're all right, if he came up and said a few words about what he's doing, I'll just
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, commissioners, for having me here. Thrilled that it coincided with some of the other meetings and workshops I was here for to be able to participate in this meeting. And really want to congratulate the commission on the work that you're doing and the recently completed recommendations. I think it was very, it was really great to see that those were issued and that city and county had actually adopted those in terms of planning guidance. Through my work with 100 Resilient Cities, I work with a number of coastal cities in the U.S. that are similarly experiencing issues of sea level rise and climate change. And it's come up recently in many cities, the need for a similar type of commission to review estimates of science and issue sort of independent recommendations to local government in order to inform planning and decision making. Recently this has come up in Houston, in Miami-Dade County, and so it's really wonderful to see the work that's happening in the city and county of Honolulu and on Oahu. So I want to thank you for your efforts and really congratulate the city for being such a leader in this space. Thank you again.
Peter Barron, any questions? He's actually out here, 100 Resilient Cities help support, a part of the network. They bring out technical capacity, and there's a Dutch group that's out here this week looking at how do we make sure that the future development around the rail, the carbon-free corridor in the East Lake Oklahoma area will be durable and reliant over the long run. So we're bringing, with the help of IRC, bringing in some of the top level talent, to try to look and design sort of 21st century here on island. In terms of other work going on, I just wanted to update you that the Resilience Strategy Working Groups, which have been meeting for the past 4 months, had their final meeting and prioritized their recommendations around the resilience strategies for the strategy that again, the help of 100 Resilient Cities will be putting out in the first quarter of next year. We'll look forward to updating on some of the findings out of those groups. 2 weeks ago, the American Institute of Architects had a big convening here in town. We led a design symposium that the city did. So many of your colleagues, Commissioner, were there, and it was great to work on sort of what does the future look like for sort of resilient city planning. In terms of the climate action plan, we've now held 7 of the community meetings of the 11 that we will hold around the island. Participation has been really strong. We're seeing a big turnout in terms of people's interest in this and the news that's been generated around climate change. We have 3 more meetings scheduled through the end of the year. We have tomorrow at 7 p.m. for the windward side at Benjamin Parker Elementary School in Kaneohe, and that's co-hosted with Councilmember Rebecca Anderson. December 12th, we're at Mililani High School, and that's co-hosted with Councilmember Menor. And then December 13th at 7 p.m. will be at Kapolei Hale in Kapolei. Again, co-hosted with Councilmember Pine. It has been wonderful to see the way the City Council and the members of the City Council, all 9 of them, have eagerly partnered with us to co-host these meetings around the island in different geographic areas to get the public's input around what they would like to see and what they value in the planned action plan. And I do want to thank the commissioners who have been able to join us at those. Appreciate your input and your ability to, again, hear what the public has to say in terms of their perceptions and where they see vulnerabilities around climate change for the island. I'm happy to report that the city of Honolulu was selected as one of the 20 cities to receive the Bloomberg American Climate Cities Challenge grant. There are 100 cities, the 100 largest cities in the United States were invited to apply, and ultimately Honolulu was accepted and awarded as part of the 20 that ultimately got it. So we will be going next week back to Pittsburgh to have that first meeting of the cohort of cities. This is really about accelerating our progress towards a carbon-free economy, especially in the transportation realm. They will be providing technical service assistance. They will actually be embedding a specialist with the city coming to focus on decarbonizing our transportation footprint. Also want to report, as several of you know, who helped write the National Climate Assessment that was released a few days ago. A press conference was just held by Mayor Caldwell to make sure that folks here locally heard about it. It was put out on the slowest news day of the year, not by any coincidence. It was rushed to come out, and we thought that the most comprehensive report ever around climate in terms of the impacts and trajectory ought to be elevated again on a day that's not the slowest news day. And so happily there were several outlets down there, and Mayor spoke really passionately about how he believes that climate is an issue of our time, and thanks to the guidance of this commission, we are going to be proposing different solutions and policies to help address it and accelerate towards a zero carbon economy. I just mentioned that the folks from Arcadis are out here from Holland to look at the sea level rise issues and design for the future in the Lake Kapolei area. There will be a public talk by Pete Deer, who's the sort of global leader in terms of water management for Arcadis coming out of the Netherlands. He will be speaking at 6 p.m. at HPU at Hawaii Pacific University at the Aloha Tower complex. And that's open to the public, and we would appreciate anybody who would like to come down and hear about how the Dutch have been wrestling with water for a very long time and the experience they've gained. And now that they've been on the ground here looking around for a few days, give their reflections about what Honolulu can do to make sure that we are reducing our risk and not throwing good money after that in terms of our development in the area. And then last, as you may have heard, Councilmembers Fukunaga and Kobayashi have introduced a resolution 18-221, which is scheduled to be heard in committee this week. It does urge the city administration to adopt and establish several goals. Many of those are in alignment with some of the commitments that the city has already made. Many of those are in alignment with some of the recommendations coming out of this commission. And I just wanted to let you know that it is really positive to see council leadership sort of aligning with the administration around some of these climate issues that are really coming to the fore. Our office wholeheartedly supports the resolution, and we encourage you to stay engaged as the city council continues to take leadership on these issues.
Are there any questions for Representative?
Question about the resolution. Just out of ignorance, exactly what a resolution means.
So So a resolution is usually sort of a statement of position. It's oftentimes, it doesn't, it's not an ordinance, it doesn't change any law or policy per se, but what it does is it often states the position of the body and sort of where they would like to see future goals and ordinances go. And so what it does is I think it serves as a really strong foundation to bring, to signal, if the council passes it, that the council is in alignment on several different points that have already been put out there. Some have been put out by the mayor, some have not, so there's this sort of alignment and a strong foundation for which to bring policies that will align with those goals and statements in the resolution.
Do you see any areas of the resolution which could use some comments from us? Other than general support, but are there any specifics that could use some?
I'll leave that up as you guys are the experts in the field. We rely on your wisdom and guidance around climate issues. We have gone through the resolution of climate change in terms of, looking, but then we're very happy with the language and amendment language that has been proposed by Councilmembers Fukunaga and Kobayashi. Nothing specific that we would recommend, but would encourage you to take a look at it, and if you think there's ways that it can be better, obviously you guys have a lot more background than me.
When's the hearing and when was the last time for testimony?
Tomorrow 1 p.m. is the cutoff for testimony, which is 24 hours before the hearing at 1 p.m. on Wednesday the 28th. And the hearing will be, it's the Public Works, Infrastructure, and Sustainability Committee, and it'll be meeting in the council community chambers right here in one of the hall next to us. Thank you.
I have a question about the Bluebird American Climate Police Challenge. So the transportation specialist who's going to be, sort of, what's the duration of that grant? And the specialist who will be here, what, will they sit in your office or DTS or?
Yeah, so the current, details to be hammered out, but the current plan is to have that position sit in our office and work closely with DTS and DEP and other departments around transportation issues. Department of Facilities Maintenance as well has fleet responsibility. And so the idea is that it would be housed with us, but would work across these departments. It is a 2-year position, so there will be, whether it goes on longer, it will be subject to other funding availability, but for 2 years, it will be supported by the Bloomberg grant.
Other questions or comments?
On my resolution. The general language of the resolution is, again, that kind of high-level statement of high-level goals, and it is for the purpose of aligning positions, but there aren't any specifics, really. Is it not, is the point of a resolution to not get into specifics and how things would be done, just to kind of establish a goal?
I would encourage you to take a look at it and see, one person's specifics might be another person's generalities. I think there's a range in there from, there's some pretty specific language about, I think, adopting the coal initiative, which is there will be no more coal on our island after 2022 when AES shuts down. So there's some very specific hardline statements of principle that I think can translate into policy pretty easily, and then there's some other ones in there that are, I know that there are dates that are contained in there, so there might be some, input from the commission on dates, whether they should be moved up or not. So those kind of things can be negotiated, I guess, around whether that's specific or general, but I would definitely encourage you to take a look at specific places where you think it could be improved.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, questions for Director Sandberg from the public? Dave?
Dave Brady, here. I attended the Hawaii Kai outreach, and it was, really good interest, a lot of participation. I'm curious, it seemed to focus on mitigation strategies, and then when they're counting adaptation part, like for East Honolulu, what's the process for beginning to look at adaptation strategies for that specific area, like East Honolulu?
So the question was,
So you know the microphones don't work.
oh, they
So
don't.
don't worry about it.
So, question is around the climate action plans, meetings, they look like they're more around mitigation and not so much around adaptation, that's exactly right. There is a climate action and adaptation plan that we endeavor to do, but we're taking them in chunks, and we're taking action first, which is the mitigation element. So the board game and everything that we've developed around the public meetings is really focused on mitigation, and part of that is because we know the faster we move on mitigation, the less adaptation we'll have to do. Second, there will be an adaptation component. It is scheduled to come hopefully next year. There is some adaptation work sort of at a high level being done with the working group, with the resilience strategy. But in terms of a deep dive into infrastructure and you know, the real heavy lift on engineering and adaptation, that's going to take more time and more comprehensive and a bigger study.
Good.
Yeah, thanks.
Something I'll add to that though, Dave, is not for East Honolulu, but for the primary urban core, that community development plan is ongoing. So now is definitely the time to plug into that for what is our most urbanized area.
Do the development plan process.
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you all. Thank you, Josh. Okay. So now we begin the fun process of trying to write in public with multiple documents. So you're all brave, courageous people for coming to a working meeting like this. So the process thus far for the public, because we can't share documents amongst us, was to send out an outline and have everybody sort of populate sections, and then we started to be able to stitch that together. So if it reads incohesively, it's because it will be incohesive at this point. And our work today is to try to bring it all together and try to make it more cohesive and then figure out where the gaps are. So just so you know where we're at. Let's see. How should we start this? Did everybody get a chance to read over this part of it?
No.
Okay. Basically, what was sent out because of the sort of sections is a general introduction, and then what was the key portion, mainly because that's what I was able to put together.
You sent it out
When,
Oh, yeah.
and then Chip, your and Rosie's section, I have in the appendix.
of course.
Chip took the first stab at it, it was kind of long.
So we'll bring content into the document. And then, Tina, I don't know how you want to tackle your section.
Well, I must have missed something somewhere, because the first thing that I saw was this here, a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, actually, I could not find the,
So,
oh,
yeah.
wait a second, it was dated on,
Don't look so far, because so far it sounds good what I said.
okay,
I also realized that I am writing, I'm an architect, you guys are scientists and researchers. You write papers, I write presentations. So what I did was, you gave me 2 to 4 paragraphs, and I thought, oh gosh, that's going to be hard. So I wrote bullets. And the instruction was, to look at Gary's report from last month and summarize it, which is impossible, Gary, to really do it justice. But I picked the big items, and then I condensed it to basically Gary's. I stressed the point that Gary made of what needs to be done, but then I added to that. Okay. So my
yeah, based on what I know, here is a step to take it one thing, one step further. I thought that it's, and so I'm prepared for discussion,
Okay.
a lot less than specific wording on the paper.
Well, and that's what I think is to get your ideas. Do you have your ideas that you gotta put on a pen drive or you can show this paper and I can get the main ideas up here? Because I think we can fill in the paragraphs, right, later. I think what we want to make sure we have today are the concepts.
This is a lot easier to talk about, so I made papers for the commissioners. Sorry, I didn't think anybody would come to listen to us talk.
And maybe, Fran, maybe I can talk about the skeleton
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
and then we can get into the, okay. Okay, so the introduction starts with kind of this overarching motivation around the rating agencies, right? The rating agencies coming out very clearly last November, saying that climate change is going to be considered on both sides. How cities are dealing with greenhouse gas mitigation as well as adaptation. And so, so it's, a lot of this is quoting or referring to that November 2017 Moody's report. And then following up with Director Standro's testimony a couple of meetings ago, don't remember which, on that Moody's had followed up with a survey asking these three questions. So this is really kind of the context of, the reason that rating agencies are evaluating this is because climate change is basically undermining the physical health of cities, right? Or will undermine the physical health of cities in multiple ways. So kind of I'll lay that out.
What if we just read it? Read it out loud.
Sure. Okay.
No, I want to hear an overview first.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we're saying that this white paper characterizes the mechanisms for increasing risk, which is basically the physical science, right? Which was Chip and Rosie's section, describes what is doing, what the City and County of Honolulu is doing in response, or could do in response. And this is kind of our sections, right? So there's the physical responses, which is the Tina section, and the financial responses, which is Vicky and my section. So move from the introduction to the next section, increasing hazards. This is where we have a 7-page appendix currently that needs to be summarized into like 2 to 4 paragraphs.
I got it.
Got it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had it in my mind, but I might not agree.
All right. Well, and this is good because we can sort of agree on tone and emphasis
Yeah.
today. Then physical responses, building codes, land use codes, in the teenage area. And then, just because this was Vicky in my section, this is the one that I actually have in here, the market-based responses to risk mitigation. And so Vicky and I drafted about a page and a half on summarizing the presentations from Guy Carpenter, as well as from our city's BFS. And then pulling in a combination of gray literature and peer-reviewed literature to understand what other places are doing and some of the ways to think about this. It'll end with a kind of status update of what Honolulu is doing and could do, and this I think is where we're going to need potentially a little bit of staff help from the office to pull together the right numbers. That's it.
Yeah, I think that, we talked about this a little, but where I got stuck on our section was really how to get to recommendations.
Right.
The sea level rise recommendations were a lot easier than this big economic suggestions. So I don't feel confident in my review of the literature that I really know what Honolulu should do yet.
Yeah, this is a pretty big, we had a little bit of back and forth on this, and it's issues and the things to sort of look into further. But I would agree with Vicki that at this point I don't feel comfortable making strong recommendations about specific actions other than.
I mean, there are things that I talked about that other cities have done, how they financed it, or what they're doing in terms of reinsurance, but in terms of the map would be right for Hawaii. That's where we want to go instead of just layout options.
Like all good papers, we might think about peer review. Put together our best shot and then send it out to a number of people to comment on. Get it back.
So people from the audience can comment as we're writing.
Josh isn't here. I suggested that for the C-level rise paper. It's out of paper, but I think it's a solid scientific practice to get peer review.
I think particularly in this instance, since we're all very uncomfortable with the topic of hazard and risk, because it's very much like, it's a risk, we don't, we can comment on postmortem, on like what other cities have done to rebuild, but I think we're going into a new phase of thinking about where cities should go, so.
Well, we can comment on what the different market mechanisms are that exist out there that we've learned about, but without sort of specific quotes for specific temperature triggers, it's hard to say if we should do that or not.
Do you want to talk about potentially like who we would want to review, or hold that on for later?
Why don't we hold that off until we have a more complete draft, but I agree, I think we should go.
I ran into a similar issue because in a way I feel we're trying to prepare for something that we don't quite know how big it's going to be. So how can you do this sensibly? Let's say we want to prepare for Hurricane 5 hitting from the east side. That's so overwhelming of an issue that we have to make a decision where we draw the line, what's doable, what not. Or do we want to write the codes, or suggest to write codes that prepare for it, very well knowing that it would, I don't really want to where exactly we want to draw that line. You see what I'm saying, right?
I switched to Emily Bigland a little bit because I quote in here and read an entire paper by Martin Weitzman in a review of economics and statistics on this, about how it's basically like ridiculously hard to do a cost benefit analysis with this kind of long tail uncertainty, right? Like low probability, high catastrophe event. So yeah, you're not the only one feeling that.
So you read it, you can help me.
So basically just so it's ridiculously hard to do. But I think that, to your point, Bettina, I think that we can think about our recommendations on the physical side as well, and then and that's sort of one bucket, right? And that to me, is maybe because it's less my area, it seems more bounded, maybe not. And then there's recommendations on the financial side, right? And both of those mitigate financial risk.
Chip, do you want to talk about your appendices and the increasing hazards or Rosie?
Well, yeah, so maybe if you open my document, you can see that I made some comments on chips. So Chip took a first stab at this, which was great, and then I just basically made comments on it. So, do you want to go over your highlights of how you structure it?
Yes, so I went from the large to the small and began with just a couple paragraphs about extreme weather. The whole thing is about extreme weather. So it opens with a couple of general statements about stresses and shocks. defining those, distinguishing them, and then moves into global trends, and walk through some basic, very recent literature, drought. The magnitude of drought is likely to double 30% of the global landmass, and then tropical cyclones, talking about some of the features of tropical cyclones that have been observed and also are likely to occur in a warmer world, rapid intensification, greater storm surge because of sea level rise, larger storms that are moving slower, they're wetter, the wind speeds are higher. Then extreme rainfall, just sort of setting the basic physical background for that. And there's a nonlinear relationship between the rise of water vapor in the atmosphere with every degree of warming versus the amount of rainfall that comes down in a storm. So we see roughly 7% rise of water vapor with every 1 degree C in air temperature, but at least 50% more precipitation than would have happened without global warming when Hurricane Florence made landfall in North Carolina. So then on to weather disasters. There is the famous Munich Re chart, above that one, growing disasters. There's actually a paper that I discovered that someone wrote about that chart. And the number of weather disasters is up 14% in the last 20 years and has doubled in the last 40 years. This is insured losses. And then, U.S. trends here. Got into U.S. trends, and there's just a great NOAA page on rising billion-dollar disasters over the last decade. Borrowed a lot of material from that. Then into Hawaii, basically a review of the salient elements with regard to extreme weather from our climate change brief paper. And then talked about extreme heat, talked about some of the reasons why extreme heat are potentially deadly, and just touched on some of the things we need to do in adaptation to extreme heat, and then into tropical cyclones. And finally, this recent paper that came out by Li Ning on modeling storm surge into the PUC. There's a great map there, and presented that. Oh, and actually finally went into ENSO, the rise of super El Niños and La Niñas.
So, my major comment on that was that I thought that we might want to, because we were looking at condensing this, and that if there was going to be an appendix, perhaps more of the global trends can be put in an appendix, but we should focus on the Hawaii specific, regional specific trends. So he had a whole paragraph on Hawaii, and I thought that might be, instead of starting here, the extreme weather shocks, the paragraph that we might pull out more just begins, it's up. There's like a couple comments where I'm like, this is what we should expand. Those two paragraphs is where I think we might want to start in terms of, if we were to cut it down and just take like the really good stuff, we should really focus on Hawaii specific trends. Within this, however, there isn't anything on flooding, and that's a major Hawaii risk, given our high islands and short distance from the base of the Pali to the shoreline. So that would be particularly where I would expand. And
I don't think hurricanes are mentioned in there, the tropical cyclone.
yeah, and so we might also want to expand on tropical cyclones. The other kind of shock that I think wasn't mentioned were marine heat waves, or because of elevated sea surface temperatures, that could cause massive fish kills, which could increase pathogen risk, but also, you know, cripple our fisheries. Anyways, those were also things that I was thinking about. I also started thinking about infrastructure, and I was like, wait, that's not our section. But then it was like, infrastructure risk and human migration, and I was like, okay, that's not our section, but I still put it in there because like, it was on my mind when I started college.
Can you just put a flag for tsunamis? I don't mention tsunamis.
So I wasn't sure if we were going to mention tsunamis. I actually commented on this above because it's not clear that it's climate related.
As sea level rises, what used to be,
Sure. Yeah, we have to elevate the tsunami center. But I think in terms of chronic expenses, so one way that you might want to structure it and think about it, I was thinking is what are risks, physical risks that are more likely to be chronic expenses, like higher, what are we more likely to see versus less likely to see? So in the case of, you know, flooding, I think of seasonal flooding, right? I think of how many times was the bridge to, you know, is Kona Highway closed, going into my Holy White Country, you know, and that doesn't have anything to do with hurricanes. It's just seasonal. Yeah. So the other thing that reason why I like focusing on the Hawaii paragraph is Chip focused a lot on the urban core, and I think that we have to be very cognizant and continue to remind ourselves that this is an Oahu specific, Oahu-wide commission, and we have to look at the rural areas and as well, or you know, not so often, and the impacts that they have, particularly because there's a lot of erosion that they're experiencing and other kinds of risks.
I like your idea of organizing these risks better in terms of the chronic expense,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, you know, it's not our duty in the commission to choose which thing that, you know, which event that should be insured or whatever, but to kind of present what we think the chronic versus catastrophic impacts might be, and then present ways in which the city can address those.
So I think that's really, I agree with that, because it's, I think, really important from the perspective of how you might go about financing, right? If something has high probability and sort of known outcomes, that's something you're gonna more likely want to more traditionally finance your tax base, or traditional bonds.
Stormwater would be
Right.
more chronic,
Yes, I know, a fee versus
catastrophic.
event issue would have staff on or something,
Right. Like a tsunami would be much more rare, although with sea level rise it could be much more serious, but it's much more rare as opposed to.
So maybe having a table, so of the chronic versus catastrophic physical impacts.
so what would you have for chronic? What's an example?
To me, it would be flooding.
Flooding or tidal flooding
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
storm.
Also,
flooding.
yeah, precipitation. Yeah, so it would be like storm event flooding and then tidal flooding in the back and the front.
Yeah, I've got seasonal coastal erosion. Drought, growing, the dry periods in general.
That's seasonal, yeah.
So,
And then you have more multi-annual is what I would kind of think about that. And then you might, those would be like, you know, the areas that might have increased frequency of hurricanes. I mean, hurricanes are seasonal, but like the number that we are under threat from is a multi-annual kind of phenomenon. So,
And there's a question of when you get into the catastrophic things like an El Nino that causes coral bleaching event or something. You know, right now we might consider something like that catastrophic, but projections are showing that's going to be chronic in a few years.
yeah.
So what do you do with that? And of course there was, what is it, the Nature Conservancy that got a parametric policy on coral bleaching in New Mexico.
Yeah.
so in addition to bleaching, I would just, so sea surface temperature. And then the shock version would be more heat waves of that. So there's chronic, should we call chronic stressors? Chronic.
Stressors.
Stressors. Is that what we were in this? Stressors. And then the shocks, we've got tropical cyclones, marine heat waves.
Would a non-marine heat wave, a regular heat wave, be considered chronic or catastrophic?
Well, marine is like sea surface, like it's in the ocean.
So
Yeah,
heat
it's-
wave and marine heat
Yeah,
wave.
marine heat wave, yeah, heat wave.
I think a heat wave would be catastrophic, not like that.
So you know, I think rising sea surface temperature as a stressor and marine heat wave as a shock.
And then there's sea level rise, which is like a constant.
That's a
Right.
stressor.
So,
Extreme precipitation would be a shock.
but might become more regular, so then. Oh yeah, and I had mentioned elsewhere that we should make note of these extreme events that have happened in Hawaii, so like February Hawaii, we should note that, you know, we should talk about what happened in Hilo, when, you know, Hurricane Lane, because these are exemplary, things that,
Tsunami would be.
yeah. Was it April? Maybe it was April. Oh yeah, sorry, February was what happened on the windward side. Yeah, April. That's right, it was April.
And then we would want a way to prioritize all of the, all of the events that each of those.
Give examples.
Yeah, maybe examples, maybe local examples,
Yeah, and also to rank them in some way in terms of
some kind of index.
their chronicness or their catastrophicness.
Yeah, it could be like the number of times this happened in the last 50 years. I mean, could
Yeah,
be,
that's a good event.
like it could be like number of events, just as a number. Although,
Events in Hawaii, so
Yeah.
statewide.
yeah, happened statewide. And let me find out because I know that the instrumentation has been really good in the last few years.
Okay, so now we're getting fairly
Well, we should
comprehensive.
do a walk, actually.
And do we really want to be this comprehensive?
Well, I mean, wait, I mean,
We should probably just do a walk.
okay.
I don't know, I mean,
No.
this is context. so
I guess
maybe
my
like-
question is when hurricanes come into the whole state, like, you know,
Yeah,
we're all freaking out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
as we see, they can do anything at the last minute.
yeah,
Um,
and otherwise the number of events might be too small, but.
Right.
wildfires. So we've seen this rise in wildfires, none of them are, have been truly catastrophic, but they've been growing more and more.
It could be seasonal, it's
Every
not.
drain, so there's a stressor or a shock?
That's a stressor.
Stressor,
So,
definite drain on budgets, manpower, human power.
Can I ask Courtney a question on process? Can we create a Google Doc where we have the power to edit and anybody who should want to view it could view it?
actually, yeah, because we need to make sure we can make it open to the public.
Yeah. So anybody can go and click on that doc at any point in time and see the draft
In progress.
in progress. So it's completely transparent in sunshine, and then we would be able to edit.
So I guess the main concern would be, I don't know how many of you would be editing at the same time. Remember that quorum thing? So if you've got 3 commissioners working at the same time, that's probably what's going to be considered quorum. So that's going to be considered a meeting of non-notice, basically.
So what if we made sure no more than 2 were edited?
You could have a
Yeah, we can do that, we have a schedule.
Independent, excuse me.
Yeah.
If we put it on suggestion mode, then the edit doesn't actually happen.
Right.
Yep.
Put anything to your suggestion, but not just sort of one line.
Yeah,
It's
that's a good
meeting.
idea. Well, and then people from the public could make suggestions and comments. Yeah.
Yeah. We can discuss it in executive session if you'd like.
Could we do the executive session after today? Or does that require an agenda change?
No,
the end of the meeting.
Okay, whenever, as long as you know it's gonna happen.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we do that? This sounds much more effective way to go off there something. No, I
Yeah,
can't.
later.
That way we don't.
It seems less painful than the last time we did this, just wanted to say.
We're getting better at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we have our shocks, our stressors, and kind of we figure out our ranking by the number of events in the last 50 years or whatever, then we could use the TINA section on building codes and land use to kind of point at what could be altered to address each one of those shocks and stressors.
And we could reach out and help.
Yeah, and this will be one mega table in the end.
That would make it, I don't wanna say it would make it easy, but that would be, very helpful.
Okay, now I'm wondering if something like this already exists.
Not for Hawaii.
Like somebody, really not from Hawaii,
Yeah, there's something,
Like hazard.
some kind of hazard,
there's a
like,
coastal hazard atlas that somebody wrote in the early 2000s. It's online.
does anybody know one? Tell us now. Give us testimony if anybody knows of something like
It's
this
the
that
it's
exists.
a USGS, I think it's a USGS open file report.
Yes. Coastal hazards, Hawaii coastal hazards.
Yeah. Doesn't have everything, but it has tsunamis, hurricanes.
Oh, Chet, it's by you. Okay, thanks.
Water there,
I'll put something
here.
like that.
sometimes it's still there. Like I say, it's out of date.
Yeah.
Can you bring it up?
Oh, no, his Wi-Fi is not
Oh,
working.
and it, I don't know, if you have to give it a run GIS. I have,
Here,
I don't have GIS.
well, they're just maps.
Are they, this is GIS files, and you need, okay.
So what's it got? Tsunamis. So tsunamis, stream flooding,
Oh, okay, cool.
hurricanes,
I've never seen this. Wait, I've read this.
strong,
Okay.
wait, go back.
Are you in the hospital after?
Strong winds.
No, I'm using Honolulu Zoom. Yeah.
So we don't really need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we just gotta take this, how long is this, Joe? Like 54-page document?
That's a lot.
Make it a couple pages.
Yeah, but no, this would be a really good, like, appendix.
All 300 pages.
Karen, do you have comments?
I'll offer a comment. The Honolulu Hazard Mitigation Plan has a chapter on each hazard. And it's the updated for events, up through,
So what,
2017.
what is that again? How do we find it?
Well, whatever's online will be the old version from 2012. The version that I'm working on now is the updated. So, the more recent events are accounted for.
Yeah.
And so forth.
Are there drafts that are publicly shared that we can refer to?
Yes.
Okay. Can you send that to Win, Gary, so that we can get a copy?
Okay.
Thank you.
So it sounds like that, the hazard mitigation
We'll find that.
document, which is previous document will help
I
us.
think this is a good foundation, though.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
I'm looking at a lot.
Yeah, kind of get a number of events and rank the severity in terms of discussion of the shocks. And then it can be up to us to categorize them as a physical response that could be taken and a financial response that could be taken for each.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that makes it very clear, that you can like look across this row of the table to see your options.
be great for the sort of characterizing the hazards, right? I guess there's, if people have comments on whether you think Vicky and I, and obviously once we go through that, we'll probably change it, but if there's anything you think that we missed here.
I don't know how appropriate this is, but Gary, I'm looking at the hazard mitigation plan. It has a date of 2012. Has it been updated? I didn't catch.
Yes, that's the old version, so, I'm working on an updated draft now, which is what I said I could send over to you.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't catch. Perfect, thank you.
There's a 2018 draft online, but it's still loading. I think we can have a paragraph break beginning with the sentence insurance markets. Right there.
Well, then one thing I think we'll want to put in here, Vicky, is how appropriate the mechanisms are for stressors versus shocks. And I think we can have that in there. We can do that after the table.
Yeah, and I was struggling that when I was writing it, but having that table would really help a lot. Organize these sections.
Well, and I do think that if we're bringing up financing of stressors, that actually raises a whole can of, that's like mission creep of what we had originally thought of with this. But it's important, potentially, we're talking mission creep with that. But it opens up a whole new thing, right? Like we could be talking about very, very different.
I mean, one thing is how do we adapt to sea level rise?
Right.
That's what you're sort of opening up.
Exactly, which is what,
Multi-decadal issue.
right.
Yeah.
So one thing would be that we want to keep this on shocks. And really just deal with shocks alone.
I think so.
Okay, can you explain why we want to keep it on shocks?
So that we can keep it focused and readable rather than a big long report. And if we want to do one on stressors, then let's approach that as a way to work through it. One thing that's great about the two other papers we have right now is that they're really short and readable and focused.
Okay, I guess I'd still like to acknowledge the other ones and then say like maybe we'll address those later.
Yes,
If we
because
can be
of-
explicit about that.
This is because of coordination with the state that we would want to go with the shocks first.
I think it's because the financing mechanisms are so dramatically different.
I mean, so what would the city? I guess the city really address those.
Well, I mean, here's one way I would describe importance. We really dodged a bullet this past summer with Hurricane Wayne. So do we really want to take on multi-decadal stressors, or should we get a focused set of recommendations out with regard to shocks?
But that's exactly the question I never really had. That's the core of my problem with this.
What do you think, Bettina? Shocks or authenticate, like, or, I kind of think of them as like steady functions.
We might not have, I think the stresses might be easier to digest. And because I'm not sure whether we can prepare for the shocks.
Okay, yeah, that's true. It's more predictable because it's
You could
Gonna
build a
happen.
12-foot wall around the whole island if you
Exactly.
wanted to, so
But try selling that versus,
You could buy catastrophe bonds.
yeah, example. But do I want to go that route? No.
we could make recommendations about building codes, recommendations about how much money to sock away for a hurricane hit, recommendations about emergency management issues.
improving our hurricane shelter centers.
Well, a lot of that is happening in the update of the HMP, right, that Garrett just
Right.
mentioned.
Right.
But, okay, so taking into context, right, the idea of rating agencies caring about this, they care about stressors and shocks. Both are important to the health of cities.
I think for this group here, it would be good to create nice structured tables, and then we can figure out our recommendations and what we want to base them on.
Yeah, I mean, I could actually see 3 tables. Table 1 is like the table of physical stressors and shocks. And then table 2 might be, you know, the dealing with the stresses, dealing with the shocks. If we wanted to kind of like keep them separate, maybe a way to go, digging in different like papers.
I can see that.
Are we wanting to separate them because otherwise it'll just be too long? Is that what it is?
That's what I was thinking.
But I see Christina's point that it might actually be easy in terms of building code to deal with something that has more predictability than something that has much less predictability.
But I don't think that we should determine necessarily what we want to address based on so much as, based on the predictability, so much as where do we want, I mean, so we set out on this topic of climate change and financial risk, right, which really has to do with both. Except one is more foreseeable than the other. So, I think this is really about boundedness and length.
But you know what? Maybe all we can do is to make a recommendation and say, this is what we need to do for stresses, this is what we need to do for shocks. Maybe it's not up to us to say we should.
That's right, there needs to be more process
For one or
oriented.
the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it's too much information to have 3 tables.
Yeah.
And
No,
you
I agree with that.
focus on what the risk and what the mechanism is. If we were to implement that, I don't think that it's too much information.
Yeah, I think you're right, we don't have to get into the specific financing mechanisms so much as characterizing the types of mechanisms,
Yeah.
which is much more helpful. Okay. So I'm deleting this and vote.
So it's in the characterization of the.
And then I would love to talk to Josh in the office more to see what within that structure of the tables of risks and financial and physical responses that fits in with what they're thinking and what they just did all these working group meetings and they're doing the climate action plan, what fits into what they're already looking at, and then if there's something that they're more interested in, we could give more examples or elaborate on.
are the three tables again?
The stressors versus shocks,
Physical hazards.
rated by their kind of probabilistic likelihood of occurrence or the number of events that is stated that we can find. So how severe they are. Then the physical response mechanisms to address both the shocks and the stressors, the types, characterize the types of mechanisms that would be used, and then a financial.
So table 2 is types of responses.
Physical responses, so
Physical
building
responses.
codes,
Oh, okay.
and then financial responses.
Emergency shelters and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the third table is financial responses.
Yeah, insurance,
Insurance,
taxes.
forms of revenue to long-term for stressors, stuff like that. Okay, so I can proceed action B, so maybe you guys are already decided we can do table 1, right? Is that what we're talking about?
And then once you have that, pass it on, maybe Tina can do table 2. And then pass it on, we'll do table 3.
I like this because this is a very different approach than what I came from the cold side, while this here, and then you apply that, but this here gives me the event, and then I can pick the code that might be
Oh.
most applicable to.
That sounds like something.
So then if we have these
Yeah.
two tables, sorry,
Oh,
then we just have sort of a page or 2 or 3 of financial tools.
I mean, I think we still keep, and we've written a lot of text and have, some good context in there. I think we want to keep that around, but the
Yeah.
tables will be the meat of it.
That's what I'm
right?
thinking is, I mean, we get those tables out and then maybe a lot of it's already written.
Yeah, at least, I mean, for the section that we drafted, I see keeping like 90% of it, and maybe rewriting just a little bit and adding some more. Is anybody here for that, for comments?
you can figure out how to do this over, maybe Google Docs.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of share some information. The State Climate Commission, one of their recommendations is to move ahead with mandatory disclosures, sellers and buyers. And then I noticed I did some research on that, the California Coastal Commission has a guidance document that's come out called Assumption of Risk. And it's specifically about mandatory disclosure and deed restrictions. You don't have a duty, but it's sort of trying to make it very clear that there will be building restrictions on armory, and things like that. It could be conceived to be as a takings, but we're warning you up front that these things might come. So I think it fits in that category.
Sir, can you repeat, it's California?
California Coastal Commission, I'll send you the document.
California Assumption of Risk Doctrine.
Yeah. Right. But it's about mandatory disclosures, but particularly on the purchaser side, as opposed to the seller's disclosure. We're going to be putting in a draft for both sellers and purchasers. The purchaser, for instance, is a tougher one to deal with, but it's in the works.
I was reading something similar on the California Coastal Commission website yesterday, that's about sort of if armoring was done, there was going to be a payment made, almost to sort of, as a transfer of value from the beach, which could argue is a factor. Yeah, I don't really like that. Yeah, I'm doing very different legal context for our beaches, but yeah, they're doing some interesting things.
Yeah.
Other comments? Other things we think we should consider in our white paper?
I'm sort of struggling with how to put it into your context in the discussion. But the thing that the recent federal report stressed, and that's come out of comments, is the fact that the climate change impacts are multiple impacts and they are interacting impacts. The one obvious in California is the link between the wildfire, the drought, then the spring rains that are more intense, then you get the vegetation, then you get the drought and the drying out, and the wildfires, and then you get the hillsides that can't hold the water and the sedimentation. And so looking at the risk associated with flooding in it by itself, it seems to me that's wrong, that somehow you need to look at the financial risks to the public and to the private sides of how this is all coming at us. That's the big picture that we somehow need to figure out. What's the smart way through it?
Yeah, we can't view these in isolation.
Yeah, and the other part of it is sort of like, where do you start with what's the level of risk that's reasonable to protect against? And that's the, you know, how much money are you willing to put up front so that you don't incur, that you have mitigated your risk and improved your resiliency versus, oh, we're just going to let the insurance take over. And I think Gary Chalk's criticism of flood insurance is particularly appropriate in why are we protecting against the 100-year flood? The Dutch seem to have decided to protect against the 500-year event because they were so traumatized by their experience in the 50s where many, many people died. And they said, we never want to go there again. I think we're choosing to let people be damaged and die because it's easier for the property owner to say, oh, it's an insurance solution. I think there's a value choice about how much financial risk you're willing to accept versus how much you're going to spend up front.
Thank you for this comment. Other?
Like, what's our deductible?
Yeah, and I do have a very, very vague sentence on that in here, but it's quite broad. Right, just this idea of, you know, kind of well-crafted insurance products can sort of incent you to mitigate your physical risk, right? Whereas poorly crafted ones can do the opposite, which is kind of a flood insurance example, right?
If I could just, listening to the presentations on insurance in the preceding meeting, it was clear to me that for the long-range sea level rise issues, they weren't going to, and even maybe the disaster, they weren't going to be that helpful in terms of a long-term perspective. That
Yeah, they don't plan long.
you know, they're now writing policies that are longer than 5 years or something like that. So when we're coming and saying, hey, this is going to be a bad area to be in 30 years, they're not giving incentives that are reflecting that 30-year perspective. And that you would need to do it in a regulatory way rather than an insurance way. Financial incentive through the insurance market is not going to work. The only way you could get that sort of incentive is if you wrote regulations that keep people out of areas or increase their costs from a regulatory basis, which you can do under FEMA, and that can result in your flood insurance rates. If I require a regulation that you protect against the 500-year flood rather than the 100-year flood, then FEMA will reduce your flood insurance rates.
You could do something simple like just add a foot or two to the base flood requirement. I think they've done that. New York City or New York in general added some freeboard to the BFE.
So for having done that, there can be an incentive that sort of rewards the taxpayers by saying, okay, because you've made that higher requirement, that regulatory requirement, we'll give you a break on your flood insurance because you've required more protection than would be required if you just were doing the 100-year flood.
Under the Trump administration, all federal projects had to go to the 500-year flood. He issued an executive order saying that federal projects now, we don't have the 100-year flood, we have the 500-year flood. But then, that was the Obama administration, but then the Trump administration rescinded it.
Right.
There's an executive order out there online under the Obama administration, which we might want to consider as some guidance.
Yeah, I mean, in Bettina's notes, there's something very similar to that, also referring back to the hazard overlay zone and the CLOS guidance as well.
I think some of these very good points could be reflected in Bettina's section. We could make it clear in the text that these are two different types of encouraging people.
One other aspect that
Can
we
you
were.
introduce yourself for the record? Sorry.
Sure. I'm GM Ogle. We're based in Seattle, but just visiting. I'm from Guam.
Thank you.
It's ground zero for climate change.
Lots of things.
One other aspect we were talking about, which wouldn't so much be a physical stressor or circumstance, but there are financial aspects to it, would be the social inflow of people from neighboring islands or outflow from, even outflow from Hawaii to other islands, so you lose your tax base if people start to leave because of the overtime creeping changes.
Yes, I think the townships thing, it's an indirect effect, but it's still climate overall, it's migrations, and I have a link to it in my, something to consider in my, cost.
There's also, this hasn't started happening yet, but there's people from the coastal zone needing to relocate.
Yeah.
Even within the same islands. Yeah, so that is a stressor.
I'm so shocked that there's still so many people in the room.
Yeah, thanks for being with us.
I think the recent report really has less concern.
Oh, yeah.
I'm here specifically looking for housing, and the only place I can see that's safe from a potential homeowner is Hawaii Kai. And just as far as the elevation, you're not too high up on the mountain. The mountain's going to come eroding, and then the water's going to be coming. So there's only going to be a thin sliver of property left on this island that is habitable. And so the heat waves start to make it so uncomfortable, and we're losing the trade winds that people are going to be migrating up to Alaska.
The volcano.
Big on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's exciting to see that this commission exists. And I'm really excited to see that you guys are doing this work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Other last comments? And it can be for input on matters not for the agenda, that weren't on the agenda also, if anybody has a public announcement.
I have just a really stupid question,
Yes,
which is, are there any financial opportunities to this?
Oh, yeah. Insurance.
Yeah. I mean, would it be appropriate to put it in the white paper? Would it be
I like that.
financial risk?
You should.
Because maybe it'll help people, shape people or point
Yeah.
people into a certain direction.
There's, I mean, the construction industry and the
Yeah.
infrastructure across the state and the nation, it's all out of code, out of date, and if not now, will be soon, so there needs to be lots and lots of,
Or how about something more basic, like, gee, we're gonna get a lot more rain, should we be collecting more fresh water?
yes.
I
Yes.
don't know,
Yep.
I mean,
Or trying to increase.
Canada,
Discharge.
I read something about Canada basically celebrating some of the impacts of climate change because their farming season is gonna be a hell of a lot longer.
Rain's gonna go, we'll see less long soaks and more intense, and short, intense rain doesn't do much in terms of recharging the aquifers, so we need to catch that stuff.
We need to figure out how to reach our samples.
Yes, we don't do that now.
That'll be the
Just
basis for
to
irrigation.
Does Japan take advantage of intense rain? Do we fill our aquifers?
There are lots of municipalities on the mainland that have stormwater fees. So it's part of your monthly bill is to pay for stormwater catchment, and it does a couple things. It mitigates flooding to some degree, and it feeds into reservoirs and water resources.
I think Tokyo has built containment facilities to capture the storms.
I think that's crazy.
Seattle has
Seattle does, yeah.
requirements for rain catchment on commercial roofs.
Yeah, there's an architectural thing.
The two gentlemen in front of me raised a good point. We barely have any place to go.
Just adding and compounding on this idea, so as a potential home buyer in your state, one of the things, one of the places we went to and specifically focused on was Hawaii Kai, because it was built by Henry Kaiser, and he had it in mind that you'd like to think he was thinking in a forward thinker when he built these homes in that specific area. To me, it seems like those homes, just by the location, are going to be the most resilient. And I'm not trying to say Hawaii Kai is a great neighborhood. It is in many different ways, but also many not so different ways from a socioeconomic standpoint. These homes are valued at $1 million over, and they're made of wood. I don't see these structures as withstanding Cat 1 or 2. Back in the 60s, Guam went through these serious storms, and that changed the building code overnight. Typhoon Pamela hit in the 1960s. Shortly after that, within a 10-year period, there was an even bigger storm, Typhoon Karen. I'm not sure if I had that in reverse. Karen hit 24 Pamela, but all building code changed. Kaiser came through, built his Kaiser developments, which would basically reinforce concrete rebar, and that just became a standard. And you had it in very nice neighborhoods that were using that material, as well as the lower income homes were. And then the federal government came through, and all of their Section 8 housing was in concrete as well. And so there isn't any structure on that island that will be able to get insurance on if it's not reinforced concrete, period. You build out your lanai, and it's just a corrugated tin and wood. If that structure blew away, which many do, the insurance wouldn't cover that part of the house. So it has to be concrete and steel. And you're not finding that kind of material out there. There are some homes in the Hawaii Kai area that were built with the walls as concrete, but the ceiling is wood. And that's going to be the first thing to blow. So I guess it's a little bit of a put off for me. I have to live in a hotel in Waikiki or in a condo that's built with concrete, but it's not my favorite neighborhood. I'd rather live in the burbs out there, away from the city. So it's just, you're not seeing the availability on the island, and that may change as a result. In the future, it looks more and more likely that we're going to get on Hurricane Lane, and we're just sitting on a time wall on this island with that. So, but anyway.
Garrett?
I did want to offer a word of caution, because I've been hearing more allusions to Hurricane Lane. Okay, so you don't have to wait for climate change in order to get a Hurricane Lane and
That's
ice-falling
right.
event, okay?
That's right.
So I'm kind of starting to resist it against the idea of using Hurricane Lane as your poster child for climate change. It's not. It's within the realms of probabilities for the current climate. You know, when you think about it, Oahu has been super lucky not to get a landfalling event, but if nature takes its course, we will get one, and it won't take climate change to do that. It's within the normal tropical cyclone climatology for us to get these things. So rather people not get too carried away with, waving that as your, I mean, it's super scary, yeah, I know, but nevertheless, it's a present thing, it's a present threat, it's not a future threat.
Yep.
Just want to make that clear.
You're right.
I
You're
don't think we
correct.
were using it as a.
You're totally correct. Just like El Nino, these are multi-annual climate modes that are seasonal
Right.
threats that come and go, and they're very regular. It's the intensity and frequency that might be accelerated or altered with climate change. So yeah, but you're totally right.
Yeah, we're exposed, even if historic levels were all we were dealing with, and we're gonna be worse shape with the way things are going. That's, you know.
Yep.
We're behind in terms of dealing with what we already have.
You're 100% right.
The only reason I wanted to bring up opportunity was because I wanted to kind of reduce the premiums that we have to pay on our bond issuances. I'm totally selfish, but, you know, these agencies, as I've worked with them in my past, all they're worried about is revenue disruption. And if you can say, well, yeah, you know, revenues can get disrupted and there's going to be some damage, but the upside is this. And so, you know, kind of paint a balanced portrait, because I tell you, these guys love to make money off of you by paying you good and doing, and I just don't want to see that happen to us.
So Moody's sent a spreadsheet around to the city 2 months ago asking what the city was doing with regard to preparing for climate change. Moody's rating company, bond raters. So they are collecting that data and presumably make a decision about ratings, premiums.
The one thing I would say is, look, we're on our way to the 2045 mandates, and, you know, just moving off of fossil fuels is probably going to help us a lot in terms of resilience and survivability. If you take a look at some of the things that went on in Superstorm Sandy in New York City and Puerto Rico, the one thing I learned or took away from this is if you have electricity, you're going to be okay. You can survive. You can have water to drink. Puerto Rico does not have any electricity. New York City, they had tons and tons of fuel. No electricity, you couldn't get it out of the ground. Ridiculous. But, you know, again, there's got to be some positive news, and it makes it easier to spend, you know, the $200 million that we got to spend. I think.
Thank you all. I think our next agenda item is the tentative next meeting date. I feel like that sort of depends on the result of the executive session. So, I don't know, what do you guys think about tentative next meeting? Basically, do we have a December meeting, or do we push to the new year? We have a December meeting.
I'm December.
I know you are.
December is hard. For me, right now, it's hard.
The first 2 weeks of December are hard for me.
Yeah, the third week of December, week, we've gone, okay, this first 2 weeks are hard, and the third week is fine for me, and then after that it's.
Yeah, the third week is okay for me, but yeah, that's
And you're gone the third week.
The third week is the week of the 17th.
Yeah.
And I propose we have
We have a Christmas Eve meeting.
We
have
have
the people
memorable
show up for
Christmas.
that one.
Can I propose we try to reboot the week of January 7th then?
So the 17th was out? Or wait, what?
No, Vicky's gone.
Welcome to meet that.
I mean, unless you meet with them.
Okay, I could on the 18th. The 18th that week is the only thing.
I could do the 18th. Oh, no, I can't. I could do any other afternoon that week but the 18th.
So you're going that whole week plus the rest of the year?
I'm back on the 22nd.
Are you back on the 22nd?
Then we're basically in Christmas.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
We're not doing that.
But, I mean, if you want to meet that week, I'm happy to keep contributing to the white paper, however we figure out is best.
Right.
And then we can do that.
I can meet on the 17th at 3, or the 17th. Or we can push to January 7th.
We could set a date where material needs to be gathered. We don't need to necessarily meet, but if there could be like a deadline for waiting or something like that.
Why don't we wait till we have our executive session and figure out how we can best write? And then we can do this with by email. Okay. Are there any announcements? Commissioners or from the public? No? Hearing that, why don't we say we'll